So start up there. I have no idea how good the video is for them, but let's just see. Did you want to try the strong mocha?
Um,
It's just coffee and chocolate. I
no
don't,
more coffee today.
I don't think I'll have so much either. That's weird actually, where the video flipped when there's two people. So let's undo that. That's better, isn't it? Leaving it on just a bit. Yeah, so we won't talk about too much today, but we'll go through this, get their feedback, and see what else.
Oh, oh,
I got you guys laughing. Look at that. This one's quite cute.
this one also good. See?
Oh yeah, that was this morning, little video. Maybe we'll even get to see him. Turn off other internet using things. Hey Mark.
Hi.
Hey, oh good, we can see you and hear you.
And hi to your plus one. Billy, good to see you.
We are in town.
Great.
Internet's not better. We found a coffee shop. Because the weather is nice. I couldn't bear to bring her straight back to Wimbledon.
Yeah,
When
the
there-
weather is awesome today. I brought some sunshine from Italy.
Really did.
Steal them.
Yeah, no, it's been a lovely day. So you're traveling a lot, Mark. What's happening?
Oh no, we just need to fit in a visit to family up north, and in fact, I just had to Woods down to Dorset for something yesterday. So it's and I'm having a nightmare trying to the walkthrough I was going to do for with Deanie and Wendy. I don't think it's going to happen because I just can't get anyone at the university to do the sort of AV stuff. You know, the trouble is now everyone's working from home. You can't go to any office and speak to somebody and actually get something sorted. So at the moment, really, apart from a meeting time, but I'm going to talk. I'm going to talk to Deanie directly and see what she wants to do because the upside is that I think they're probably going to sort of do a bit like the Radio 4 reunion program, where sort of get a whole lot of people together and record that, which doesn't help Deanie as such, but
Will they meet though, at least?
Well, I'm going to ask Deanie because I'm going to say to her, look, if the sort of really isn't going to be any reasonable filming, do you want to schlep all the way down there? Otherwise, I might come up and meet her or something, and because I mean I know her flight back is booked, and it's stupid things like the uni won't let me park up in Gower. So I said, well, I only want to bring a senior academic and make them schlep it through the rain up from the bottom car park, which would probably be full anyway. So I sort of fast thinking, I it's giving by me a bit of bus. Anyway, I shall put those things in front of her.
Yeah,
anyway, that's out with this meeting.
yeah, no, that's good. Sorry, just got some extra strong coffee chocolate. Right, so yeah, Fabienne, look who's here. Surprise, surprise, no one knew except I don't keep surprises quite as well as you. So we are in town.
Hello.
Hello, Fabian.
The,
How are you doing?
the weather got really
Very
good.
good. How are you doing?
I'm good in London. Today is sunshine. We got so much sunshine here.
Yeah,
Nice.
I felt it would be overly cruel to just take her back to Wimbledon quickly, but we have actually had a phenomenally fun day talking. We talked, of course, a lot of machine intelligence, which is the primary interest, but we also looked at some other things. So we have something to show you guys, and I hope you don't mind.
Go for it.
Cool. So the first few slides you've seen, but for context. So it's this thing that I briefly talked about at the end of Monday. You pull the paper down and you get a longer thing. But here's the key. You pull it out to the side and then you get different aspects available. And we've had some ideas about this today that we'd like to talk about. So these are just the old ones. The new ones are a bit clearer and simpler at the end. So first of all, this comes from the world of fiction. So the question is it useful in non-fiction, specifically academic work? And the way that Jesse was talking about machine learning, machine intelligence today, and what Mark said roughly a week ago about it might be interesting to see if there's something in the paper that the system says is opposite to what you yourself have said before, which is like proper AI, proper all of that, but just as a fun experiment. That was kind of interesting. So this is what we've been thinking about. And first of all, this is not a AI push, particularly talking to you, Fabienne. There are different things that can go in here. Some of them might be AI, and Jesse is helping me understand local LLMs and doing it from the ethical point of view. So this is not me just saying, let's do ChatGPT, happy days, right? Now, there is a well-known paper called 7 Hypertext. I'm showing you this for two reasons. one, it's fucking long. Two, there's 2.5 billion references, but this is a proper paper. First of all, it's real and it's very good. Let's just wait for this movie to play. So to just have a column straight down, it would be a really tall column, right? But if we then move into, by the way, this is playing okay for you guys? The video.
Yeah, it's all good.
Okay, because it's off my phone. This coffee shop is lovely, but I don't have internet. Right. So, many ways to fold, first of all. And Fabienne, you really pushed into what I'm about to show you now. The way of you have something and then you fold away what you don't need, right? That kind of stuff. We talked about it being up and down and sideways. So I'm doing an experiment myself in Author where when you do an outline, you can choose to automatically have the names visible, which sometimes is useful. But if they are in a separate column, it becomes much more skimmable. Here your eye have to ignore every other bit. Here you can read straight down. So that really puts paid to this column kind of thing. So if we go a bit further then, here is just a fun little tiny test of doing an actual timeline extracted from the 7 hypertexts, just to have some extra thing in there. So, these things are available. And finally, from the personal research I'm doing, you see the little asterisk by 5th of January? That's currently because I have command clicked to add a note. This was originally when I was doing my thesis. I could say, Dave Miller told me this is shit, I need more examples or whatever. So it's a note for future. And it was displayed as just an asterisk for me, certainly shouldn't be output. But I'm changing that now. So it's listed in the outline after the title. So it's to help using horizontal versus vertical space. So here's the thing that Jesse and I have been talking about today. For fun, we're calling it Unfolded. And I'm crediting Sarah Walton with inspiring me learning about these things. Even as Fabian said, it's been around before. So we can just skim through some of these. Some of them are hardcore available if we own the original data, such as body text headings, references, maybe even timeline and names. We can extract highlighted text by the user. For instance, that could be there. User key terms versus reader topics. They can be defined in different ways, main topic, blah, blah, blah. Even quotes, and then images and places. So here's the first thing. This is what Fabian's been talking about. You can, well, first of all, you can move the whole thing anywhere. It's just a big flat thing by doing that. But you can also, bam, bada, bam, selling it to Brussels. If you select any of the headings and then you do a pinch with your left hand, you can edit what makes that happen. It can be a call to external AI. It can be just logic. It can be a local program. But the key is that the user can choose to just click and move, but they can also program each individual column. How freaking cool is that? I want to see a thumbs up from Brussels. Come on now. Anyway. So
It sounds a bit like, you know, at the, not the roller coaster, but at the fair. How cool is that? I want to see a thumb up here, a thumb up there. I don't have this level of enthusiasm, but I'm glad you have it.
Well, this is the thing that I'm so grateful for our particular community. There's a lot of things we just don't agree on. And that means as friends who respect each other, we have to sell. And that means we have to think clearly and relevantly from the other person's perspective, right? I literally put that in there to sell it to you, Fabienne, but I realized it would be truly useful. This is the whole point of your world. The user can control, so why not control here too, right? So even if you're not super enthusiastic this split second, that's fine, right? So this is the other thing about...
Just a thought on that. I mean, so what I see when you show me this is really that is I suppose, you know, there are headings and stuff, but what I really see is potentially what you've just described is you could have a set of commands. So what the table is a combination really of the data structure underneath. So in other words, I see the sort of sketch here, but really what it is the table is whatever it needs to be, and what it is, or the maximum it can be, is all the effectively the data fields, columns that you define in the data set that is the document.
Absolutely right. It's a hyper spreadsheet.
And so I mean, that way, I think it just makes it more flexible, and I could see in that sense that one of the things being that part of the data set might be that it's actually storing it, or it might for instance might have a way to know and find which, say, known defined JXR commands are there available, so that the person doing the editing, who's not necessarily of the skill of someone like Fabienne, can basically go and find the right thing and sort of connect it up for themselves. And I think, and allow Fabian to correct me wrong, that seems like a quite open system. So in other words, you taking the nice sketch that's here now, I can see a sort of an extensible system that could be more or less depending on what you need. And I think part of the value of thinking of it that way is then it avoids getting into a sort of debates about, you know, which column goes in which order and which is different, because of course it's going to vary for people, and invariably people will have slight tweaks, or, you know, people who work in a different field might actually have want to sort of, in a sense, a different organization. So if you start from the premise of saying that's an inconvenient necessity, if you think of it in terms of, okay, so what your picture is defining in terms of the information is, okay, so it needs to have a concept of all these things, and then that way we can for instance interface it with commands that might be available in the environment, or even if it's just the case that you may define an endpoint, you might define essentially a function that doesn't yet exist, but when that thing is written, it would then control that column.
Yeah, Mark, 100%. And as I've shown you guys a million times, this is the author map. Part of the problem in here is it is very useful to have things in a list in a column, but I can't easily show and hide columns. So even though you could say that this is a capitalizing to a spreadsheet, spreadsheets are amazingly powerful. There is more I'm going to show you, but yes, it's essentially an open cell system. Fabienne, please.
Like to give a simple example to make sure I understand some of it at least is if you do so right now, for example, for some of the commands, when you drop them, it becomes green, right? So if we imagine here that we were to, it applies this color only to the code snippet you had in the hand, basically. And here, from what I understand, the suggestion is like, if the contents of those elements are in that column, so the same, let's say, y coordinates, then instead of being green just for that last dropped one, it greens for all those elements. Is that a correct example?
I don't know.
Okay.
Let me explain it in this way. There is a document, a paper behind this. The first column knows to display the entire body text. And this one is just an outline. But it's an outline that is aligned with the body text. And this references, this is really important. There's going to be a slide on that. Actually, no, we had it higher up. Hang on. Whatever, I'm not going to waste your time now. But under references, for instance, you should be able to sort this column by, here you go, see? You should be able to list it chronologically, alphabetically, or by name, that column. So that column may not at all line up with the body text. So sometimes it will, but sometimes not, because, and this is why it's interesting, because for instance, over here we have names. Those names would line up with what's in that section, so you can skim down, right? But the user should be able to change the order and say, no, I want the names alphabetical. So it'll just list all the names. Now it will not line up, but if the user then selects a name, it should then highlight where in the text, in the body text, those names are, for example. I think I should go a little bit further for the proper discussion. So in this, hang on, no, I took too long making this animation for you. I'm not going to just ignore it, right? So this is the folding, Fabienne, that you talked about, right? So if you pinch towards vertical lines, they get thicker. So that means you can pull them together and you will then hide what was in between your hands, right? Kind of a basic interaction. This is really important. Also goes to what Mark was saying, and you should be able to reorganize these things. You should also be able to tear off sections that you find are worthwhile. And then kind of finally, here is places. And this interaction, I don't know how it should be done, but this is what we're currently thinking about. If you pinch at the top above that, not in it, because that edits what it is, and then you pull, you'll get a specific view that suits that. For instance, this was places, so therefore it shows a map where that's lined up to. This you can pull off and put anywhere in the space. And this is the final stuff. These are the key selling points, so to speak, the way we look at it. Yeah, Mark, please.
Just a thought. I mean, I sort of get the pinch and fold stuff, though. I know in my heart of hearts that actually really more likely, if I was actually using something like this to do actual work, I'd actually want to be toggling off What I really want to be doing is toggling columns on or off, or actually moving them in order, because even in the course of a session, I'm in the tools I use at the moment, I'm constantly changing that, because what I want to see juxtaposed is very closely linked with the thought process here. So in other words, which is why I find the only bit the bit that allows me to understand is to think about what the data underneath looks like, because that what I do. I start as being empty, because what you're going to do is you're going to fill them via an external call or an AI, and that's fine, because essentially the model still allows for that. It's just that particular bucket is empty when you sort of open the document. So I guess what I'm saying is that I think the pinch stuff is interesting, and it's an interesting thing to do, and I think it's a useful gestural thing. Whether it's actually useful to the sort of task we're talking about here, I'm sort of unconvinced. Not because I don't like it, but simply because I don't. It doesn't actually get you to the thing you're needing to do, which is to do quick and fine-grained control of what you're seeing juxtaposed to something else. And as I put in the chat, what I see in this is one of the sort of key, built-in assumption here is that the row in this sort of setting. So when you come to line things up, the row is essentially a segment is, I don't know what, it might be a paragraph, it might be a heading, and I'm not worried that we don't know what it is, but in a sense that so the body text column, as it were, that thing controls the rows. So what goes in what box in any other column is actually controlled by the document, the blobbit of data's understanding of these blocks of text. And I don't think we need to worry what they are, apart from the fact that that's the intersection of how those two things come together.
Yes, and a complication would be if you do a different sorting where that breaks. So maybe, and I agree with you, Mark, how the interaction should be done, it's maybe not pinch, it could be, quick, I agree. So let's say maybe you have names, that's one column, and now you want them sorted alphabetically, not according to the document. Maybe that's a case of flipping it around to use the spatiality, and now you have it ABC, so it's kind of separate, right? Because one thing,
yes, because in other words, you're in a sense lifting it out of that grid.
you're lifting it from a context.
Leaving aside the complexity or not of doing that, I sort of functionally that in the sort of intellectual process that makes sense, because there's enough of a distinction of a sort of mode change that's there. One thing I did from a scene, and it's like I'm working on a set of about 100 references at the moment, and one of the constant problems that I'm finding, and this sort of thing would be useful, is just being able to see, especially when you have numbered references, is something that tells you something, and it's probably likely to be your own tagging, because you want something short enough that you know that it could just literally be almost 8 or 9 characters, that okay, I know what that thing is, I know what number 41 is, and as you keep going backwards and forwards, because in this case I'm looking at about a 10-year span of quite interlinked documents and trying to work out which ones are pulling from something. And even if I made a graph of it, the graph wouldn't really help, because I actually need to understand it in the context of reading the document. And this is why all the stuff we're doing is really interesting, because it's part of this deconstruction. And I know there are all sorts of issues to do with the fact that the network we perceive doesn't really exist because so many information sources are broken. But if we for a moment allow ourselves to think that that's all correct, what's really useful is to be able to do this sort of mapping thing. So it's cognitive offload, just saying, all the time, right, I don't need to worry about it. I know what that is, or I can easily re-find it without having to step out of my flow to find something else.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. We're on the very, very same page here, which is funny, page. Just to remind you, Fabienne, of one of Mark and my good friends and advisor, Les Carr. He kept going on and on about he wants references to be a first-class object, not something stuck at the back. Right? So if we do something like this approach, the sorting and view change of the references becomes really important to back up what Mark is saying. So for instance, when the references do line up with the body text, you may very well want to do a simple thing to only see the names of people, or suddenly the dates. Whatever Mark needs, that moment has to be accessible so that Mark can organize his thoughts via references, right? So this all starts rather flat, but as we start pushing and pulling on it, we can start adding useful dimensionality.
A quick thought on that. This isn't to sort of disagree, but I was just thinking that actually, whilst that sounds a good idea, I suspect you end up with an awful lot of background mechanics just to make things fade in and out. Realistically, probably what springs to mind immediately is that more likely what you will be doing is you will be doing some pre-tagging of your own. So you'll be putting some flags in that you, the user of the environment, understand. And that's probably what you'll do to tie in the references. Because one of the other issues, and it becomes apparent even in our little test set, is that it's good to have created that JSON, because you can now see the thing that I've sort of struck up before is you end up with an awful lot of text, and it actually is very hard to, what you know, in a sense, the more you symbols, which admittedly means that probably the symbols only mean sense to maybe one person in the room if it's shared, but often it is just you or perhaps future self doing it. The more you can reduce these things to symbols, the cluttered the information picture. And I take this back from working on warfare systems in the past, using very complicated 3D information, real-time information puzzles. And so the one thing you always reduce the number of things that you had to, the thing that you saw just see through to all sorts of richness of information behind, but you only needed that when you needed to see it. Because if you think about the graph we've just looked at, if all those fields were populating because we either provided the data or we did the lookup, there's an awful lot there. In fact, there's too much to take in. So it's super to know it's there. So it's good to sort of think of the grid in those terms. My thought is you probably would never want to see it in those terms, except if you were testing for completeness. But in actual use, you'd almost invariably want to start with essentially a subset of things. And something I don't have an answer for, but I'm reinforced in my sense of finding a way that you move from textual labels, which seem to make sense until there are lots of them and there are too many to read, and you don't have enough room to display them, to something smaller. Because one of the issues that tends to force you into doing things like lists is because it sort of makes sense. I would say everything I've experienced and read in the area of using these sort of spatial arrangements is you don't want that. Untidiness is good, because what you're looking for is proximity. You're looking for a sort of, you're looking for productive propinquity. You're looking for the serendipity that comes from this thing being in relation to that. Whether you did it by hand or whether you called on some bit of automation, a sort of query of some kind to do that. And that's the underpinnings, in a sense, of what spatial hypertext was about. It's the fact that if you're not having your mind distracted by lines, when you see this idea in relation to that, it's quite strong, and it fits very closely with our associative thinking, which I think is why people found it so sort of an easy pull-in when you showed it to them. So in a sense, it's more a philosophical approach in a way than a process.
Yeah, that's a good point. To address that in a roundabout way, first of all, when we were having fun at the Groucho earlier today, and you should all feel very jealous because next time you need to be here when we're all together, we went through the implementation of AI in author and reader. And we decided to do some back checks. So one of them, I made a really simple prompt that was, again, using your paper, Marks, like what are the major topics on this paper? One of them was electronic literature, of course. Great, it explained it quite well. But I couldn't see where it got that information from, so I wrote a new one. I said, where does this paper discuss electronic literature? Return all the relevant sentences, and it bloody well did. It was very interesting. So being able to have those two kinds of categorization fits into a spreadsheet format very well if you want to. Your visualness, Mark, I obviously agree with very much, partly which is why I have the mark and fade system. We should also have more tagging system, completely agree. Now, the way that I'm thinking about this is very column-like, because I think columns in most cases are really, not in most, many cases, let's say, are really useful, because then you can filter within the column, and you can, one thing you should be able to do as well in this is to clone a column so they're identical, but in the new one you made, you do a different sorting, let's say. And you can maybe view them next to each other if you want, or turn off on the other side, whatever you want. But you're absolutely right, Mark. We must not lose sense of the potential of spatial hypertext thinking. So it should absolutely be possible to explode these things so every element is free floating. It'll still be owned by a column, so you can summon and hide and have different layouts. And that should also relate to the color coding tagging, right?
Possibly. I think one of the only, it's odd. I mean, I sort of get where you're going with the sort of spreadsheety type grid, but unless you have non-Euclidean folding, actually folding is not as powerful as perhaps it appears. I mean, and again, I don't want that to sound like a negative. It's an emergent complication of what, in a sense, one's trying to do, because this is where the mind is wonderfully plastic, because we can do that crazy stuff. You just don't imagine the bits you don't need, and you pull things together. So I'm sort of, in looking at this, I'm thinking of both sides. How does a sort of an underlying grid work? I see how it falls out naturally from a long form document, but that presupposes that your mental start point is a long form document. And I'm going through writing two rather complex papers. That's in both of them. One I'm not the lead author on anyway. That's not really where the authorial process is at the moment at all. So that's something to noodle on. What we need to be careful is that we don't.
Can you elaborate on that, Mark, when you say that's not where the authorial process is?
Okay, so the thought space. So if we call there's a grid we've just looked at, a thought space, is sort of, in a sense, so as we just discussed. So the underlying structural part is for instance, the row structure is based on an amount of a source text, which is a long form document. Yes, it has some. Yes, it works if you're within the quite narrow bounded task of maybe doing some sort of constantly bouncing around. So I'm at the moment working, I tend to be using about 2 or 3 different visualizations the whole time. And it's constantly changing, because as you circle in on each you start filtering it a different way, and it's difficult because it's so agile at doing this. It's always a painful reminder that just how difficult it is to build these things within a software construct, which is what RxR space is in any other sense. I don't mean that in a trivial sense, but we literally have to write the ones and zeros to make that.
So absolutely, and you're highlighting an important point. It should be possible, ideally, even in this environment, to pull forward the cell that has your body text for that section, and basically hide everything. I know you're not literally saying this, Mark, but you should be able to go into normal typewriter mode should you want to. The authorial process is not moving big cubes about. So having different views and different interactions is important, even if it doesn't touch exactly on what you're saying. But also, this is
So how?
no, no,
Go ahead.
no, please.
Okay, just I'm thinking. So, how would using this? How would I juxtapose two paragraphs from this paper, three paragraphs from a different paper, but attached in different ways to. So, in other words, it's taking a mélange of things from various places and putting them together, because that's often what you're doing in here. You're sort of you're creating that. So, and maybe I'm unintentionally moving the scenario somewhat because, in a sense, this structure is basically showing you the
Okay,
constructional
Mark,
underpinnings.
I have to interrupt you, otherwise my brain will fall apart. I hope that's okay. Currently, as is, this doesn't address what you're saying at all, right? But it will. 1 second, because that was very helpful. First of all, this is also designed for reading, right? So hopefully you can take someone else's structured paper in, and you have your own columns, so you do your own analysis that you can easily skim through. That's the first addressing of this. Secondly, I have been very strong on separating reading sources and your authoring cube or whatever. Mentally, for me, that was important. But what you've just highlighted now, Mark, is there's nothing wrong that if you do something like annotated bibliographies or whatever it might be into one of these, let's be honest, let's call it a spreadsheet. That is your source. You have that in one part of the space, and your author document is in another part of the space, and you can move things around.
Yeah, so this goes back to something I was probably didn't explain sufficiently earlier on when I was saying, well, so if like in this test space of information we have, you might have 5 things, you might have 500, but in a sense, you want the potential to be able to do what you've just done with any of them, because you'll be diving from this thing to that thing, opened up, get this bit, because what you then want to do is cross-connect it back to that, and probably at the same time move its proxy object in the environment maybe closer to that one, or you want to change its color or its shape or whatever, whatever minimalist representation you're using, because that has semantic weight for you in holding on to the interrelation of the things, because you put them there for a reason, even if it only makes sense to you individually. I mean, there is this big issue that going from one to many, you need actually much more formalism and structure than you imagine. Whereas you can have something that's fundamentally, to anybody else's eyes, something that's just a complete ball of string and nobody understands it, but it absolutely makes sense to you who made it, because you put everything in a place for a reason. So this is where I was when I was saying think about the cube, because in a way, if I have an XR space of, well, we have something with 20 objects, any of those things, at least one at a time, can be a cube. Given that the cube, if I'm understanding correctly, is in a sense the read/editing interface of that object. And then if I need to look at another one, I might have to close this one and open another one, because it probably would get too complicated to have several of them open, even though I'm sure that's something that people ask for. But baby steps. At least you could, because you're looking at this, so in this document it was talking about such, right? What I want to do is I now need to open up that one and have a look, and for instance, do I see in this one the relationship of what I just read there? So this is part of the reading process that I'm constantly schooling myself in the sense that I keep sitting down to just read, and what I notice I'm doing is I'm actually constantly moving between books, papers.
Yes.
What you're constantly doing is you're re-inquiring about whether your understanding of what you read there is manifest when you actually look at the thing that it's talking about. Sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't, which is why it often becomes a looping process, and occasionally you find out you misunderstood completely, and actually then got to go in a different direction. Right.
So yes, this is very, very exciting. By the way, I think we should finish in 22 minutes. So we've done 1 hour today, right? So we don't, because even though this is ridiculously useful, have you read the comments, Fabian? I wrote a specific type of, just right. Because here's the thing, Mark, you are being really wonderful in the way you're stretching things now into realities, right? So if we think of this, hang on, I've hidden our view here, so we can only see you. Let me just want to make sure I'm not pointing into weird space. So basically the concept is there's a thing in space, what you're reading or authoring. If you need more, you stretch it out. More and more aspects appear. And because of the reading aspect of, billboarding and all of those things, if it is wherever, we're using space wrong, I might say. I'm not saying it's black and white, but you pull it out, you get more and more of what you need, but you also pull it up and down. So if you want to focus on a bit, you can, but at all times, everything is there. So even if you have decided to pull out a quote or a section from a document and put it here, you can still pull it up and the entire thing is there, right? These are old hypertext tropes, nothing new, but it is literally there, the entire thing.
Well, here's the thought. Because one thing I still keeps bouncing around in my mind that sort of and hasn't settled into place is that the cube, that's like the grid we're looking at, is when that cube is open. Do I still see my map, for want of a better word? Because that to me is that is probably the most valuable thing that XR offers that my screens don't, because I've got this big space, I can put lots of stuff in it. So there's the question. So when I open the cube, hopefully I don't lose all other context. Otherwise, then we've lost everything. I mean, you might as well go back and do it on an ordinary screen.
Okay.
But if this goes back to the point is the cube essentially the rich view of the currently selected object in the information space? And I don't know.
Okay. Right. So, Mark, in the way of looking at this, there is no cube. It may or may not be 3D depth. But for now, it is literally a couple of spreadsheets floating in space.
Okay, but whatever shape.
No. Hang on. Yeah. I'm getting there step by step, right? The first scaffolding is, and Fabienne, I just absolutely love you for using that term. The first scaffolding is rigid columns. But as we've discussed, you need to be able to at least extract a column for further work. Let's say you're only interested in the references. Pull it out, so to speak, redo it, blah, 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 all of that, right? And in that case, the interaction needs to give you opportunity to only see that column, but to keep the others. That's an implementation thing we need to test. So in that way of looking at it, Mark, all the things in your spatial environment will remain unless you do an act to say some sort of focus mode. Like, I'm interested in the foreground thing, hide everything. But the management of this is very important, absolutely.
Well, here's the thing, and the reason that I sort of think we're zeroing in on it. So I mean, I suppose the way I think of it, sometimes you have a system where you might have something like a sort of a view in a two-dimensional interface. You might have a thing where you almost have two panels. One is some kind of a view spec, a graph, an outline, whatever, and the other is, in a sense, the detail of the selected object. And that's sort of what I take from these things that are being presented. So the cube, the grid, whatever you call it, I mean, essentially, there is an unpacking. There is a rich view of one and only one object in your data sphere. But it can be any of those things. It just can't be multiples. Where this is pertinent is, if you have this and then you want to pull out these other things in front, I can imagine it getting sort of informationally potentially quite sort of complex, because you're beginning to do things like having nested views, because you're in an overall view, you're in an environment, then you have this other thing, and then we're going to pull some other stuff out in front of it. And they're all easy to imagine. I can just sense from things I've experienced working on sort of 2D knowledge systems that it actually gets quite funky quite fast, because you get all sorts of problems of crosstalk and update.
So Dini pointed recently again to our job is annotated bibliographies. It's even in the Sloan thing, and I'm very grateful she helps to keep us on track. Now, you should be able to do every single thing in Fabien's world, but you shouldn't have to. Something we obviously agree. And for demo purposes and experiment purposes, we certainly cannot ask Fabien to build everything, obviously. So that's where the notion of the annotated bibliography is so useful. So what you and I have built, Mark, with using the annotate field, I mean, it works now between author and reader for testing. One of the ways to deal with it, maybe, is that when you're in an environment doing your annotations, and then you decide to start authoring, what you bring in is the annotated bibliography as a spreadsheet. So you don't have every single thing floating in space. So we separate where they are, and this may be spatialized. I mean, one of the key things, and sorry I didn't get to that earlier, even though it's all column-based, it will be very exciting. And Fabien, I'm not trying to kill your brain here, but if you're able to pull out every single cell, if you want to, and do a spatial hypertext, you should be able to do that, ideally. But to have that view stored as that, so you can always snap it back to a column, pull it back out. So anyway, we're not going to solve it today, but the spatial management, Mark, you and I are absolutely passionately engaged with. You do more proper paper writing, so to really interrogate this with you will be great. And I hope you can do a presentation to our group on spatial hypertext soon to help us understand this better, because spatial hypertext on the surface is obvious, but not from the way you properly understand it.
Well, the interesting thing is that this is why I'm writing a paper. I'm not sure anybody does, because what it was when Kathy Marshall did it back in '93 is not what it is now. And you know, back of a fact packet calculation, probably 2/3 of people of working age basically have no experience of hypertext before the web. So when you say hypertext, what people quite rightly and understandably imagine is web pages, which isn't what this is about. And it's also weird and transgressive because it starts from the one thing that Ted Nelson insisted had to be there is visible links. But partly, links are visually intrusive and they get too many, too fast. So they're cool for what he was doing in Xanadu, but you know, sometimes you don't need to want to see them, not least of which because you want to hold on to the plasticity of the environment you're in. I mean, the real sort of affordance I see of sort of doing any of this work in XR is that effectively you've got this plastic space where you can bend the reality. Not necessarily in a full non-Euclidean sense, but you just don't have to think. It's basically stepping away from hundreds of years of thinking you've got to think in linear terms. Which is why I'm always querying when I look at things and say, okay, well, when we so grid things out, to what extent are we unintentionally doing a McLuhan-esque sort of, you know, look back? Are we doing it reflexively or are we doing it deliberately? If we're doing deliberately, it's fine. If we're doing it reflexively, we maybe want to think again and think, well, do we need to do it that way?
Yes, absolutely. And this is, I mean, goodness gracious, Mark, this is the very first conversation we had at Southampton, which was knowledge is not linear. An academic argument is linear. How can we deal with that? How can we start with nonlinear stuff, organize it for ourselves, present it in a linearized fashion, and let the reader choose the linear narrative, but also interactively see the connection? That is basically part of our problem. So one issue here might be that in this column view or matrix or whatever cool name we're going to end up having for it, you may almost like a student essay write the headings first, and then you write in maybe one column, I have to remember to write this here, like a note to self. But then when you are like, hang on, for this bit, I need to research these bits, you may just throw that to the background and open up the set and then get into more of a reading environment.
What do you mean by the background there? Because you mean in the background in the authoring space or the background?
Mark, you have arrested me, as my mom would say in Norwegian. I don't know.
Okay.
All right. So that's an absolute correct thing to ask.
And lest it appear otherwise, it's not trying to do an angel pinheads thing. I'm thinking about
no,
the
it's
thing
crucial.
at the box below me. It has to think
Mark,
about, which I don't, because I don't know how to do it. But you know, am I am I positing something that sounds really cool, but actually would be an informational nightmare? Because there's always this thing that it's useful to posit some of the constraints that we have at the moment don't exist.
Yeah.
But there's sort of the near field problem that, okay, we can only surpass so many of those, and we can fake our way around some of them.
Yeah,
But one of the things that tends to happen is that we very quickly tend to assume there's an awful lot of information that is unambiguous closer.
yeah, Mark, I agree with
See.
all of that, but
And that, every new thing you come along, and it still hasn't moved that at all.
oh, are you there? Oh, sorry, the connection went bad. I agree, Mark.
Yeah, yep.
We should not throw the baby out with the bathwater. And similarly, we should not overly jump into XR for the hell of it. So the balance is absolutely right. The term that Fabienne uses, spatial scaffolding, I think is very helpful, because my suggestion here with this matrix, I love that more than spreadsheet, is that is a good working space, but it should absolutely not be a prison as well. So if we go towards something like this, there should be a mechanism through which you can go into spatial hypertext mode, where this goes in the background, and we need to decide what the background means. Does it mean...
Well, here's the thing. I get lost every time you say that, because you start in the basic construct, which is the underlying the entire environment that you have, which in a sense is where you have the objects that you bring in, and Fabienne has produced a super system where we can bring things in place.
Mark, let me just since you said that sentence, what I'm looking at here is you start with your matrix, you start with your spreadsheet. You have separately done an annotated bibliography. We may also design a annotated bibliography type spatial hypertext space, which is probably very, very useful. But in terms of just this matrix thing, that is the key thing you have. I don't think that would make sense right now to start with a huge spreadsheet in front of you and 100, 200 references in the background. I think that would be very, very spatially difficult.
I'm lost now. I'm sorry, and I'm not implying anything about that, but I'll just say I have no mental picture from what you've just described.
Okay.
I'm getting confused because the construct as it exists at the moment, the general environment, which we have, I think of it a bit like the Matrix construct. I want to load a lot of guns, and we can sort of do that. We can bring things in, and there's some really useful work's already gone in, so we can have some sort of objects. We can have ideas of spatial objects. So that's, in a sense, an obvious place you want to start. You start with the broad information that at least you think you need at this point. You may have to go and get some more, but broadly you have that. And then we have this mechanism of taking one of those objects and turning it into this sort of rich decomposition. And so the question remains how you juxtapose the two. Because if you just see, I don't get the point of just having the grid and nothing else.
Right. You can see the screen, right? Yeah. So the notion on the most basic thing is, look at this from a reading perspective for a moment, right? The source is the body text column. Names, user key terms, all of that is extracted from the body text column. The references column, the references in each cell will be whatever references are in the body text to its left. Right. When we now go into authoring, we may not need all of these. They may not be useful. But what I hope is useful is just like in, just like if you go here and you click on outline, you can choose what is visible of your own text. So for example, under outline now, I can choose to have all kinds of funky things show up in the outline. Oh, that's not what we want. Right? These are different elements extracted. So here are names. So these names in this view would be showing up here from your own written text. And I'm not at all saying this should be your only thing. But what I am saying, if we have something like this, forget the fact that it's huge, that's not a good visualization. Maybe more usefully, it would be if we do this. Oh, sorry. If we make this column really wide, for instance, and the other ones are just additional bits.
So, well, if you want to design terms, what I'd suggest to you is take that thing you've got, make it twice as wide, and have on the left of it all your objects. Just so that when you're doing your design thing, that's the closest sketch I would be able to make to that. So you've got this thing and these other things, and that is the world on which you're working. And the thing on the thing that I'm thinking of on the right, but it doesn't have to be there at all. It's just whether I'm Brad's thinking, is that this effectively decomposed knowledge object. You have one of the objects in your overall space. You've done this deconstruction on, and we have this rich internal picture, and we can do that. But part of its validity for the work you're doing is it's constantly being thought of, because in your sort of peripheral vision there is its emergent context to all the other things that it relates to. Now, those other things aren't necessarily the references in that thing you're looking at.
We're running a bit out of time, and my battery said it's a bit annoyed at me. So this comes under what we discussed for hiding and revealing. I could imagine that in this type of thing, if you select a reference in one of those things, you could spawn it to the side, right? It can appear inside, as in show me it off to the side or whatever. So you can have the elements there. And if you have a lot of elements there, they will refer to the ones, like you have said a lot, we need IDs for these things, so the system knows which reference really is which reference. The point is, what Fabienne has with these tables or panels is really, really important, because things can stick to them.
Yeah, sure.
So
very quickly for Fabienne, I mean, have you got any questions at this point? Because the key thing is, if there's something that you want clarity on,
No,
that's fine. I mean, just so I don't miss the opportunity to ask you.
Just to clarify a bit, so I put a little screenshot in the chat.
Yep.
What makes the most sense to me, and I think which kind of is the linchpin in terms of implementation, without bothering too much about how it's being processed or even what are the gesture, is basically you have an item, being a piece of text or a section of a paragraph or whatever, and you apply a function to it and to n other items. So basically you map the entry and the input, output, and function in between. So that's basically, while listening to you guys, to you all rather, I'm working on this instead, because I think it helps me to a bit clarify what's needed, what's not. So no question at the moment, but thanks for asking.
What's really interesting, what you just said, actually, and sort of clicked in place you said it, because that's really interesting, because you're almost doing something even more abstract. If you start from the premise that if we structure the data underneath correctly to allow you to do this, in other words, it's the accessibility thing. And this goes back to the odd thing. It seems terribly abstract to work off IDs, but within the space, what something looks like is just however we, to the human eye, want to see the thing that is that ID. And different things might need to be different things. Some of them might need to be not visible. Some will be.
So we have 2 minutes. We have 2 minutes left. And first of all, this is just one idea. Dini's not even here today, so I look forward to discussing it with her. It's been really great to go through it with you guys. But your concerns, Mark, are really, really important to try to figure out where we need scaffolding, where we need freedom. How to combine them and how to go between them. If you want to do some sketches on how you assume some of this, that'd be great. One thing I'm really, what I like about this is, you imagine you have something that may even look like a PDF, but you can pull on the sides and magically a lot of stuff appears. This completely ignores the three-dimensional aspect, and that may be something quite different. That may be the visual side you said, Mark, or something else, for instance.
The only thing, the one thing I would note is that the one constant of experience of stuff I've been doing is that actually, the more you engage with it, the less enactment you want. So really, what you're wanting to do is to jump as quickly as possible from the idea you have in here to the visualization that's in front of you, and that sounds antithetical to what you're saying, and I don't mean it that way at all.
No, no, I agree with you.
It's being able to jump context as fluidly as possible. What's really useful from what we discussed is what it goes back to is, and it seems counterintuitive, is actually to understand how we slice and dice the information that we put into it. In other words, so that essentially the software part of it can actually do the transformations that we want.
You added a specific feature there, I think, Mark. You said it's philosophically important things, but as a feature, I think there needs to be a column which is kind of a scratch space. Quite literally, you just write whatever. And what you write there, you can easily just pull into space. So you have you just put your ideas around. But when you hide and reveal that column, these are visible or not.
Well, it's like a pasteboard also, because what you might want to do is also drag things into it, which is might be a faster way sometimes of input than actual real input.
Yes, and actually that could be quite a fun way of dealing a little bit with the depth. I could imagine that particular column is a little further back. So it's almost like a drawer to give the idea of what you want to front, what is the inside, to start building a dimensionality of this. So we're going to go. Battery is low, and London is fantastically exciting. So Jesse has a lot to see on the way home.
Good.
This was fun, really, really fun. I'm not saying we're going to end up going this way. I don't know. We haven't discussed it thoroughly, and we haven't discussed it with Dini. But I'm very, very grateful for the level of detail. And Mark, when you say you get confused when I talk about the background, it is so important to highlight that.
Yeah, and please, just to make sure, when I say I'm confused by it, I'm not mean that you're being confusing. What I'm saying is that, it's interesting that what this says to me is it's a misalignment of perspective. So the interesting thing is to work out the how, the sort of delta, and whether it's pertinent or not. Yeah.
Fabian, are you talking about the illustration above?
Yeah, just saying that it's not really working when I release some of the content. It snaps in the middle of the space rather than on the top cube or in the middle cubes. But yeah, some of it is kind of working, and it's kind of an excuse to straighten up some older code that's related, like the snap to panel, basically. That would be the same kind of thing. So yeah, there is some beginning of something, let's say. It's not just pretty looking.
It's so exciting because, first of all, the fact that it works within your constructs to this level is amazing. And I can so easily imagine pulling the cell that you're writing into close, doing something, the rest of the world goes away. So you have the most basic writing area, just beautiful. You focus on those paragraphs, you craft those paragraphs, but then when you push it back, you have this entire space, literally matrix of knowledge that is really well organized. You can skim, your eyes work, but when you need it to be spatialized, it is. Right? So yeah, this is a fun direction. I look forward to Monday, but of course, if there's anything in between then, great. And obviously, and Mark, particularly for you, from what you said, if you write down your concerns, even about this approach, or your questions, that would be really, really, really good. And Fabian, you obviously don't have any concerns.
No concern, all good.
It's all very, very exciting. It truly is. Thank you for a wonderful, wonderful meeting, gentlemen. And I'll put this up on the internet webs. By the way, the summary of Monday's meeting is in our thing. I went through it to see if there's anything weird to edit out. But I think the AI did a very good summary job this time. And as always, if you guys want to add something manual to the bottom, I would really like that. Just send it to me and I say, Fabian also would like to add, because it was your demo. So it's good. It's actually readable now. All right, bye, guys. Thank you.
Very, very quick question before you go, and not for the recording, but it's just is Dini is she in the States, or is she in transit, or in Europe?
I think she's in transit. I think she's coming here. Which day are you leaving?
Oh, Saturday.
Yeah,
29th.
yeah. Jesse's leaving 29th, and Deanie is arriving 30th. But
Are you kidding? Just one day after me?
I know. I told her to try to come earlier, and she absolutely couldn't. She wanted to. And she's leaving, I think, on the 7th.
No, that's fine. I'll touch base with her. It's just about this visit to Southampton, which looks as I mean, I feel bad because but I just feel if she's going to schlep down, and then it's good as it might be, if she's happy to come down and worst case just meet Wendy, that's fine.
Yeah. Keep me in the loop if I can do anything.
But if she knows that and that's what she wants. No, it's not that. The problem really is that
Mark,
it's like so. I went to saw Les. So Les has now got all excited about getting lots of people together, but I can't get anyone to just do some AV work.
We're out of battery. Keep me in the loop in case I can do any practical thing while she's here. Okay, thank you much. See you soon.